Greetings, dear chess fans and experts. This is Feedmaster Max Omariv with you. Today we're going to be looking at how Garry Kasparov, the 13th world champion, executed a brilliant attack against the US champion Fabiano Caruana. This game was played in 2016 at the Ultimate Blitz Challenge Tournament, where Garry Kasparov fought against the best chess players in the United States. Fabiano Caruana opens with knight f3, knight f6. Garry Kasparov responds with g3. This is the ready opening, and now we'll see what Garry Kasparov has in store against this boring start. We have complete symmetry. Apparently Garry wants to play this game quickly. This is, by the way, the last game in this tournament, and perhaps Garry is already tired. He's not a young man anymore. As you know, he gave up chess quite a long time ago. But let's get back to the game. So far, we have an unhurried development. Garry Kasparov plays following the old Indian defense, but Fabiano Caruana decides to flank both bishops, affecting the center. But perhaps now he wants to play d4 as well to attack the center not only with pieces, but also with pawns. That's why Garry Kasparov plays c5, not allowing him to play d2 through d4. But this move has a disadvantage. The square d5 is weakened. Now the knight can go to c3. Then the second knight will go to e1. But in general, white can occupy the square d5. But nope, Caruana chooses another plan. He wants to play d4 anyway, so he plays e3. Kasparov plays knight c6, adds a blow on the d4 field, but also develops a knight. And now Fabiano Caruana has a crucial choice. He develops the knight on c3 for now. Bishop f5. Now Garry Kasparov already wants to play bishop d3 in some variants, so we need to react somehow. Now is the right time to play d4, because then it might be too late. Because black can really block this field, play bishop d3, then e4, and put a mechanical block this way. That's why Caruana plays d4. He does everything correctly. e4, an instant response followed. But this move is not improvisation. Garry Kasparov remembers everything. He had the same possession in the 80s against the chess player Simon Webb, who was an international master. Garry Kasparov has a phenomenal memory. He remembers practically all his games from his childhood and even his simultaneous exhibitions. So the guy's memory is truly genius. And this is the position he had on the board. Only there, Simon Webb chose knight g5 continuation. And here, Fabiano takes the knight to e1 and moves it to c2. Now we'll see if this route is better or not. And Kasparov goes on the offensive and plays h5. Now he wants to play h4, and this is a standard idea in such positions. Pawn goes to h4, then maybe to h3. The queen to d7. So here black has a very clear plan of attack on the king, and white starts the contour play on the queen side. And here the question is, who's going to create problems faster? The race literally begins. It's Formula 1 on the chessboard. And now we'll see who's faster. The 53-year-old Kasparov or the 24-year-old Fabiano Caruana. In chess, speed's not determined by years, as you understand, but by skill. So Garry thinks ahead, prepares his attack plan. Because there are a lot of obvious moves, like queen d7 or h4. But he dives very deeply into the position, even in blitz games. And I'll tell you ahead of time that you should have had your pen and paper ready now, because you're going to see a simply brilliant example of the kingside attack from the world champion. Lessons from the champion are doubly valuable. So learn why Garry Kasparov is going to show you. Kasparov thinks. He plays h4. This is a standard advance in such positions. He can even play h3 on occasion to lock the white bishop, but he will have to go to the h1 field. But there's also the idea to play hg to weaken the cover of the white king. So it's reasonable to hold down the pawn on h4 for now to keep maneuverability. But Fabiano hesitates because he doesn't know how to stop this avalanche-like attack. He should have played h3 with the idea of g4. After hg, he plays fg, and the f-file hides. And if black plays, say, queen d7, we can play g4 without fear of bishop sacrifice, because here we have the move f3, and as a result, white repulses, even saving an extra piece. So the move h3 allowed him to hold the position, but the bishop a3 is played by Fabiano Caruana and Kasparov is a bit confused. But he attacks the pawn c5 and wants to play b4, so there are two ideas for this move. So far b6 is played by Kasparov. He protected a pawn out of harm's way, but could not even do that. But just in case, especially in blitz, it's useful to protect a pawn, not to miscalculate. But Caruana thinks about how to develop a counterplay here. If he plays b4, then what? We can even take on b4 a couple of times, so Fabiano thinks. He starts to have painful, distressing thoughts. Kasparov is clearly satisfied with his position. Even his non-verbalism shows that he prefers to play for black here. And, by the way, Kasparov wears a black shirt which fits perfectly with the image of the assassin. Rook d1. Fabiano Caruana plays. He probably wants to take the pawn on g6, but then he gets bishop g4, and the rook has to be removed. Kasparov confidently plays queen d7. He wants to move the queen to f5, and there's also an idea to play bishop h3. Well, rather queen f5, because the bishop h3 is without threats. Bishop h1 will be there. b4, Caruana plays. He wants to open up the files to distract black's power from his king, because if he does nothing, the queen will move to f5, the pieces will rearrange, and black will checkmate the white king. So Kasparov thinks about how to rearrange his pieces as effectively as possible. He plays the queen f5. This is quite a logical move. The bishop now threatens to move to f3. There's also the idea of the queen h5. And now let's look at the clock. The opponents have 2 minutes left each. Caruana even has a little more time, but they still have plenty of time. Now the hottest part of the game begins. Everything that came before could be called a prelude. And now we get to the most interesting part. Caruana thinks, and it's really time to burn bridges. There's nothing to lose, the position is just the hardest. He plays the bishop b2. This is a sacrifice of a pawn on b4. It is possible to play cb, but Kasparov, I think, will not even pay attention to this pawn because he has a sweeter target, the white king. So far he's playing rook d8 to protect d6. Now there's no dc move because after dc, black captures the d-file. It's not so easy to suggest something good for Fabiano, though. He plays the knight b5. He can attack the d6 pawn, chaining the rook to the pawn's defense. Plus, maybe he'll take a7 potentially. Bishop f3 played. Kasparov already starts changing the pieces that are involved in the king's defense. The bishop on g2 is the main defender, the main bodyguard. And so Garry Kasparov tries to eliminate him. He really does act like a hired assassin. First he removes all bodyguards, and then he gets to the boss. This game has a forensic feel to it. But it's all because Kasparov wears a shirt that looks like Jason Statham's in the movie called Parker. d5 is played by Fabiano Caruana. He opens the way for the bishop and attacks the knight. Some change is happening, though, because the bishop on b2 was inactive, but now at least he has some work to do. It can capture the knight on f6 so this knight doesn't take part in the attack. Knight e5, Kasparov plays. The knight is exchanged. The rook takes e5, knight e1. The knight has joined the defense. It seems that Fabiano Caruana managed to consolidate the defense somehow. And let's see if Kasparov can find some additional resources for the attack. Because the knight has really joined the defense, the bishop is here, plus the important knight is exchanged. It seems that the worst is over. But really, this is just me cheering up Fabiano Caruana fans because Garry Kasparov is ruthless. He plays hg. Here Fabiano thinks, should he move the h-pawn or the f-pawn? If he goes for the h-pawn, then he can just drive in on the h-file, play queen h5, then knight g4. That's why he plays fg, so that the king has the f2 square to escape. The queen can also go to f2. Also, the pawn can go to h3. Bishop h6 is played by Kasparov. He attacked the e3 pawn just in case. Fabiano plays rook b1, king g7. He just wants to put the rook on the h-file, play rook h8, and mate on the h-file. That is, Kasparov connects all the pieces to the attack. Caruana plays rook b3. And it turns out that rook h8 cannot be played, because the pawn hangs on d6. So Kasparov thinks about how to activate his rook. He can't move the rook to h8 right away, so he has to look for some other ways to strengthen the position, and he doesn't have much time. Kasparov has only 40 seconds left. He plays queen h5. He wants to play the knight g4 and attack the pawn h2. Also, the pawn on e3 will be in danger. So again, the tension hangs over the board over the position of the white king. Fabiano takes his time to think. He still has 44 seconds, but not much time either. So how does he defend himself here? He plays h3. He wants to play g4, which is the idea we talked about earlier. He wants to push the enemy out of his territory, to push the entire black army into their camp. Kasparov plays knight h7. He wants to connect the knight on g5 to put pressure on the pawn h3, plus the knight can jump on f3. How to defend against this plan? He plays g4. Drives the enemy away, but Kasparov doesn't run but takes the fight, sacrifices the bishop for 2 pawns. And it turns out that it's absolutely impossible to escape with the king now, because on the king f1 there'll be the rook f5 and the further the way to the king is cut off. So Fabiano tries to exchange the queens and plays queen d1, but of course Garry Kasparov refuses and plays queen g3, and now the position is even more aggravated. The pawn on e3 hangs, the rook h5 threatens, the knight g5 threatens, everything threatens. Any move threatens the white king. Knight g5, Kasparov plays, connects the knight to the attack. All the black pieces are involved in the attack. King h1 is, of course, a very sure corner move. Given that the h-file is completely open, this looks like suicide. Rook h8, Kasparov plays. He connects the last piece to the attack, and king g8, he just clears the way for his bishop. Kasparov wants to play f8 to capture the knight on d6. Bishop f8, check. King g1, knight h3, king f1. The knight is captured. Now the rook f5 is threatening to check. What do we do here? Fabiano has 5 seconds left. He takes the knight, rook f5, check. He has to play knight f3, and after rook captures f3, Fabiano admits his defeat. Because after bishop f3, there's queen g1 checkmate. That was a brilliant game from the 13th world champion. He showed us the right way to attack. Friends, I hope you enjoyed this phenomenal attack from Garry Kasparov, so press the like button if you did. I also recommend that you subscribe to the channel and click on the bell notification, so you won't miss the next cool chess videos that we release regularly for you.